Today I woke up this morning, went about my daily business, only to receive an ominous email from someone by the name of Ashtaroth Krampusdotter. Now, here at Story Premise, we receive story submissions for things that people would like to see on our channel. We're a new channel, so if you want to submit your own story, there is an email down in the description in which you can do that. But anyways, someone by the name of Ashtaroth Krampusdotter submitted to us a story. And the email they sent is somewhat ominous, and I'm going to read it for you. Hello, young man. I am old woman. I have story. You read story. Go on, story premise. Complete summon ritual. Bring destruction on enemies. Win bingo tournament. All my wrinkly kisses. Ashtaroth Krampusdotter. I'm mostly just confused and concerned about who Ashtaroth Krampusdotter could be. Could it be some random person from the internet who somehow found my channel? Could it be one of my 21 subscribers, which subscribe down below if you like stories and if you want to help me change that number to a better number? Or could it actually be a terrifying, soul-eating monster from another realm, waiting and biding its time to wreak havoc on all mankind? Anyways, I have decided to make it my quest to find out who Ashtaroth Krampusdotter is. And I think our first step in figuring out that quest is reading their story. Oh, they wrote this in like a professional writing style. Their cover title says, "What goes down always comes up." Adult speculative fiction. 2,992 words. The corporate board meeting was refreshingly boring. Norman Gentry, pen skating across his yellow notebook, leaned into the discussion about Excel pivot tables. Though he'd use this exact tool to organize spreadsheet data every day, he embraced the prospect of enhanced functionality. Of the 29 men and women lounging unhappily in the cramped boardroom, Norman was the only employee not sleeping, covertly watching YouTube phone videos under the long table. They were probably watching Story Premise, or brainstorming ways to fake an emergency bathroom break. No, Norman was mindful, present in the moment. In the 8 months since he'd graduated university with a degree in data mining, Norman had standardized his life. This included 9 sets of identical work clothes, adherence to a strict schedule that maximized his financial input, and personal rules that protected against unnecessary social interaction. Pat, the project manager, deferred the time to Norman. There would be no frills in Norman's presentation. Data entry was about precision. It was appalling how the 5th floor of data time knew of manipulating Excel spreadsheets. Norman began by outlining the company objectives. His voice metered between a constant 180 to 195 words per minute. That is, until the insect incident. A buzzing over his head distracted him. The loud fly was... Hold on, was that a mosquito? It was a mosquito riding a fly like a flying steed. The skeeter's long sucker balanced between the eyes of the fly like a knight's lance. As it swooped through the air, it left a fluorescent green trail. Yee. Norman pressed the clicker in his left palm to change the PowerPoint slides. Professionals did not allow nerves or insignificant changes in the environment to best them. There was not one but 3 mosquito-riding flies. They jousted each other in flight, trailing streams of neon, fluorescent, and crimson. 2 squealed battle cries, "Ah!" and charged right before Norman's eyes. Both survived the onslaught. The one skeeter's proboscis lance broke at the nose shaft. Norman cleared his throat, once again cutting off before the end of a sentence. The bugs circled around each other for a second round. These insignificant microorganisms weren't about to ruin Norman's lecture. He curled his right index finger under the adjoining thumb. He raised it and flicked at the right moment. The finger slapped a skeeter fly. "Mayday, mayday!" the mosquito squealed. The fly crash-landed onto the tabletop with a fiery explosion that caused Norman to accidentally yell, "Pell!" instead of "Sell!" How embarrassing. Bereft of any outlet, Norman's suppressed imagination had been leaking into his daily life, filling him with false visions. Not to worry. He knew how to deal with the unpleasantness. Ignore it. Please excuse the interruption. Norman used a Kleenex to blot his index fingernail, scoop up the insect, and toss them into the trash bin. Did you just flick a fly in mid-air? Wow, Norman, I'm kind of impressed. As I was saying, Norman continued, he was irritated to find his coworkers paid 27% more attention after the entomological incident. He decided to diffuse the unhealthy energy by reverting to a severe monotone. So tightly wound did Mr. Norman Gentry wear size 7 adult ties around his neck that his imagination hardly had any say in his thoughts. Norman viewed the imagination with heavy disdain. It was merely a childhood mechanism for coping with the immaturity of developing physical skills. In essence, an imagination was a lie factory. Since his emergence into the corporate world, he'd given that deceptive dragon nothing but constant deprivation. What Norman hadn't considered was that absolute repression is only effective for so long. This is especially true when it comes to a wily imagination. Norman's internal time bomb ticked at 10 seconds. To his credit, said timer had been stuttering at 10 for weeks. The meeting adjourned. Norman returned to his cubicle, numbered 44. There he discovered a nasty surprise. His neat stack of unfinished customer invoices was undone. The top 4 pages were skewed 12 degrees counterclockwise. Someone had sat upon the edge of his desk, perhaps chatting with his cubicle neighbor, Miss Renee Walden. He pressed the inbox edges until uniform. As he did so, something black darted out. It galloped sloppily across his desk to bury itself in the longitudinal indentations between keys on his computer keyboard. The threat was clearly imaginary. Should he decide otherwise, he had 5 varieties of spray in the 3rd drawer on the left side of his desk. Quick dry insecticide, anti-arachnid, fungicide, antimicrobial, and emulsifier congealment combination action. As he typed, the black smudge panicked. When Norman's ring finger shifted to the letter X button, it flew to hide under the C. Fearing to get squished, it played whack-a-mole. Norman ignored its panting, the reedy wheezing like a teapot seething steam. At 1:15 Central Standard Time, Norman commenced a 5-minute break at the water cooler. The line, as usual, was several people long. The woman in front of him turned around and smiled. Norman! Renee Walden, how do you do? That's what everyone wants to know. She laughed. How I do it so well? It's a mystery. When I do my doing, it doesn't undo my do. Did you notice? Indeed. Norman resisted the urge to reach out and press a palm to her cheek. Renee had such a lovely complexion. Her soft skin contained floral bursts of rose red up to the edge of each cheek. He'd never. She reeked of rebellion. Considering how incongruent her green and black striped scarf was with her company blue polo, its edges were quite untucked, her heels taller than the standard 1/4 inch, and worst of all, her vertical hair bun contained a lock dyed pink. Renee Walden was a distraction, one of many in data time that drove productivity down. Perhaps Norman should write another anonymous improvement suggestion card for 6 Sigma, the company methodology for eliminating workflow defects. Yes, he would straight away. We're going to Lula's Cafe on 3rd and 40 tonight. You should come with, she said. They've got karaoke. Thank you for your invitation, but I won't be attending. It could improve your work eval, she winked. How so? Norman replied evenly. Well, you know promotions come faster among friends. I heard Bossman is coming tonight. She waggled her eyebrows. If you are suggesting unfair advantages are given due to personal relationships. At data time? She gasped dramatically. Never. Good. She took her turn filling up a Dixie cup from the water jug. We usually leave around 11, if you change your mind. Norman's turn. I only do if presented substantial evidence to the contrary of my current mindset. Smart, Renee replied, sipping delicately. Well then, I'll pray you experience this substandard deference to your country. I said substandard See you tonight, Renee said, twiddling her fingers over her shoulder, and sauntering back to her cubicle. Someday Miss Renee would understand how little power she had to influence one as affluent as Norman. Her tail was the last to disappear. Its stinger curled around his neck lovingly before scraping away. Wait, she didn't have a tail. Norman shook his head to clear it up. Properly hydrated, he returned to his desk. He sat only partially down before pain shot up his pants, and he rocketed back to his feet. The chair had been hotter than Hades. No, he corrected himself, hotter than a comfortable temperature. Hades was a mythological location. He could smell his own burning rump as he returned to his seat. It was delightful. What? While he worked, the hairs on his right eyebrow tingled. After a few minutes, he wiped at it, raking his fingers through 7 inches of hair growth. What? It obscured his vision. He closed the one eye and continued to work. This is my head, he repeated. This is just my head. He stopped and corrected himself. It's all in my head. Norman took comfort in cliché statements. Norman despised unclear statements, stories that had no social purpose, analogies that only functioned in one narrow context. The more he repeated the words, the more distorted they sounded in his mind. He could no longer remember whether the phrase was in my head or of the head in my head. Perhaps both, and neither. He clenched his hands into fists and peeped at the desktop clock. Norman did not take restroom breaks at 3:12, but this was a linguistic emergency. He snatched the pill bottle out of his lockbox and strode briskly into the men's restroom. In the corner of a closed stall, Norman twisted open the bottle. The past 4 days had been rough with the delusions. That's what these haloperidol tablets were for. Acute psychosis. He breathed relief, grateful the stall doors were vault-tight. His haggard, sweating face rather appeared the drug addict. Hey there, mister, echoed a thin voice. He pirouetted before the toilet, looking for the offending voice. Are you okay? He peered down the bottle. There, a pink baby pill looked up at him with big round eyes. Norman swallowed hard, managing to say nothing. Pick me, said a green one. Eat me, said a pale yellow. He had little spots of acne on his adolescent face, distinctly unappetizing. I promise you the time of your life, said Anna Breslin, the blue pill from 8th grade homeroom. Come on, girls, he can't eat us all. First one in is the winner. The pills bounced up and down. What are you doing? A blue pill jumped up off a red one at the peak of its jump. A blue pill jumped off a red one at the peak of its jump, which jumped off the peak of an orange one's jump, nearly popping itself into Norman's mouth. Gack! He dropped the whole lot right into the toilet. 14 white antipsychotic pills slowly slid into the U-bend. One was screaming, drowning. The urge to reach in and save the little one almost won. Norman mopped his wet face with a paper towel and returned to his cubicle. Imagination. He'd repress and starve that dragon till he could stuff it back in its egg. Using the techniques he learned in the afternoon meeting, Norman performed several pivot tables on his current spreadsheet regimen. He would not leave until the satellite announced 4 o'clock exactly. Even when the black smudge in his keyboard grew fat, chewing on his skin cells with every punch of the keys, he did not leave. Even when the lights blinked and his boss came up to whisper, "Su pas Appaloosa," in his ear, he did not leave. 4 o'clock. Norman took the stairs 3 at a time. The Chicago streets were in a hurricane. Winds rocked the skyscrapers. An umbrella flew overhead. Dirt and grime peppered Norman's tongue and littered his eyes. Still the people walked. Norman took their lead, trying not to react. It wasn't real. It wasn't... What was the phrase? Out of his head. Norman, called the hungry wind. No, he thought as hard as he could back. The evening smelled of racing rubber and the number 17. The busy world darkened at the edges, like he was looking at Chicago Central and Vignette. The tunnel vision swam and rippled on the periphery. The poster on the convenience store he walked by advertised the new movie. Did I forget to mention? Lead actress Megan McCarthy on its cover blew him a wink. Stop it. Norman had to make it back home. There he could organize kernels of rice in a line, count to 5,000 twice, or sleep the episode away. He just needed to get home. He went to turn around Fifth Avenue. Unnaturally long arms reached out of manholes in apartment windows to stroke the white ponies which were prancing up and down the sidewalks. Norman did not take Fifth Avenue. There was another subway entrance on 25th Street. He'd go for that one. A streetwise musical broke out around Norman. Norman! Sang bystanders. Norman! Bums banged their fists on trash barrels. Nuns pole danced. Young dancers flipped over sidewalk guardrails. A llama gargled milk atop a taxi. 2 yellow BMWs slowly twerked their trunks. And a dog barfed up a Death Eater. What am I doing with my life? I once was you was me. Now neither is true, said the construction worker behind the glass window. Watch him run where all roads meet. Oh, what fun, said the calico cat as he rushed by. The man in the crosswalk screen burped. Rude. Excuse you, Norman said vehemently, scurrying across 3 lanes of traffic. A skater licked Norman's ear as he pirouetted past on his board. Norman tasted what the skater did, namely the Emancipation Proclamation dipped in chewing tobacco. He's an abhorrent snoreboard, that Norman Gentry, sang the streetgoers. His hands too quiet, his tummy too silent, and manners, whew, much too compliant. This wasn't happening. Norman slapped himself hard. He slapped himself again. The dino on a leash deflated into a mere golden retriever. Better. Norman focused only on the path directly in front of him. Norman accidentally bumped into the back of a long trench coat. When he opened his mouth to apologize, the fabric crinkled into a mouth. You can't resist, though we rest. Do, re, mi. Norman! Norman! Norman sprinted, dodging statues of liberty and an impressive afro. In a blink, the stair rails going to the underground stretched before him. The musical cut off the moment he went down. Yes, Norman breathed, unbuttoning his corset of a coat. Just a train ride and he'd be home. An older woman stood beside the tracks next to him. Welcome to Aquataqua, she whispered without moving her lips. Sorry, what? Norman asked. The woman gave him a withering glare. I didn't say affendable. Where drowning is flying and breathing is dying, said the man behind her. Another coughed 7 times to the words, Where sweepers recycle those who fall behind, keep up if you don't mind. Norman's head whipped this way and that. It seemed everyone in the underground spoke at once, some without moving their lips. It's time, Norman. He ain't Norman. He's half a Norman. Ah, visit our graveyard. You might recognize yourself. We're so happy you're joining us. Join us. Norman! Norman! Stop! Norman bellowed. 18 fellow future passengers edged away from him. How embarrassing. He'd misspelled the word he'd shouted. Norman, breathing as hard as a unicorn fleeing a fleet of 8-year-old Girl Scouts, ducked his head, confused at why no one wanted to come pimple pop these goosebumps on his arms. The train materialized, a long caterpillar with eyes along its flank. He was the first in line to hand over his ticket, a paw extended to claim it. What? A sphinx guarding the entry onto the subway. He supposed it made sense. No, it didn't. He shook his head to clear it. The lion became a young teen with a quizzical expression. In her palm was Norman's ticket to Cicero Central. Are you going to board? She asked, the snout returning. The bus to Aquataqua? Horror racked Norman's body, an electric shock from his fingertips to the same vertebrae in the middle of his back. He backed away, allowing everyone else to hand tickets and climb through the giant caterpillar's eyes. Norman flipped around. A man and a woman in uniform approached, flashing blue and red lights on their hats. The front woman had a nasty scar across the eyes and the nose. Police, thank goodness, Norman said. Broadway convicts have escaped. A cannibal is taking boarding passes. Help me catch them. The men squeaked in response. After all, they were law-enforcing rats. Norman got down on his hands and knees and repeated himself in squirrel. "Let's take a trip, eh, buddy?" said the rodent with the scar. She smelled like appendicitis and handcuffs. "Anywhere," Norman winked coyly. The rat latched its teeth onto Norman's elbow and yanked him up. The time bomb in Norman's brain ticked from 1 down to 0. Norman slapped her. The rats leapt on him. One crawled up his sleeve to nestle on his shoulder under the shirt. The other wrapped around his wrist, biting its own tail to make an unbreakable bracelet. 3 appeared out of nowhere to hang onto his belt by their teeth. Suddenly, an avalanche of squeaking erupted. Hundreds upon hundreds of rats scampered from the tracks, the stairwells, and the cracks up in the ceiling to leap upon him. Resist though he did, they lifted his struggling body straight up the stairs, like he was riding a rodent escalator. "Nice and easy, pal," they squeaked. The rats dragged him to a vent in the street gutter. "Watch your head. No more funny business. Welcome to Aquataqua." "No, no!" He lashed out and accidentally punched the sun. Both his and the sky's lights went out. His body slumped senselessly onto the leather back seat of a police cruiser. Norman's desperate attempts to repress and squash his imagination out of existence had not only failed, but managed to turn it wildly vengeful. His imagination had grown independent of Norman, powerful enough to engulf reality completely. The atmosphere turned calm, his body strangely weightless. No catchy show tunes rang in his ears, no rhyming cats or smell of burnt rump, no rebellious Renee Walden or terrible teething rats. Chicago and all its noise was gone. Norman's eyes fluttered open. He found himself seated 3 inches from a clean morning window. It overlooked a prim flower garden and a lawn surrounded by a white picketed fence. Across the cobbled street was a house with a white picketed fence surrounding a lawn and prim flower garden. On either side of it were houses with prim flower gardens and lawns surrounded by picketed fences. Automated lumbering machines brushed and cleaned the street. The nearest harvested a stray flyaway wrapper, a pair of crushed water bottles, and the broken woman who was trying to crawl away. Norman Gentry had indeed not made it home in time. I think it's safe to say that whoever wrote this is a horrifying demon monster. I thoroughly enjoyed today's story. Comment down below which part was your favorite. A special thanks to Ashtaroth Krampusdotter for submitting this story to us today. Check out a couple of our other videos from Story Premise here on screen. Thank you and have an epic day.